I think that's 12 on the nose. So I think I'm just going to get to cracking. If people kind of join midway through, that's cool as well, I hope. Um, so just a welcome to everyone, and an introduction from me. I'm Tom from the Welsh Sports Association. We are the membership body for sport and active recreation in Wales. Um, British eSports have actually been members of ours for some time now, and it's been kind of on our agenda as well for some time to kind of collaborate with the traditional sports and kind of engage with different audiences and to kind of move with the times really, and kind of update kind of formats and structures where possible. Obviously, we've seen quite a number of format changes across sport already. So with cricket, you've got obviously 2020 and now 100. In cycling, we've seen things like Zwift, and even obviously today we've got Geraint Thomas in lockdown, kind of doing his fundraising for the NHS on Zwift. So that's all exciting and a good effort to him. Um, we've actually seen. I was doing a bit of research this morning and saw that there's even going to be a kind of a cycling esports kind of world championships planned for 2020. So when that actually is, I'm not entirely sure, but we can find out for you. So yeah, we kind of feel that maybe our members need to be aware of kind of these emerging markets and kind of utilize kind of the technology that's available. Um, Obviously, with considerations for obviously health and safeguarding, which British esports are all over and can kind of talk about as well. Um, yeah, essentially, it's just an introduction to esports. I've actually written down a couple of kind of fairly basic questions that I'm sure everyone else will have. And yeah, feel free to put your comments throughout the talk today in the comment boxes as we go. I'd like to pass you over to Elliot Bond from kind of British esports. He can give you an overview of British esports and a couple of case studies where esports and traditional sports have come together, and talk more about kind of their structure and their competitions that they've got going on and what you kind of can do moving forward. So, Elliot, over to you. I hope that's a brief, hopefully, what you've got planned. And yeah, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I appreciate that. Um, so yeah, This is just a little talk, really. I don't know many of you. Obviously, I haven't met any of you before, apart from I've had a brief chat with Tom and Stefan, and thank you very much for having us today. But yeah, this is going to be a little introduction to esports. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what it is, what the industry is looking like at the minute, because I'm sure some of you have probably heard of esports, but you might not know exactly what it is, or how it is operating in our young person society these days. So I'm just going to talk about that first off, and then I'll give some case studies, examples, go through what the British Esports Association is, what our aims are, and our sort of vision for the next few years. And of course, if you have any questions or anything like that, do feel free to ask them at the end. I will have a little Q&A session. So yeah, without further ado, what is esports? So we define esports in the industry as organized competitive gaming. So this is important to understand, that the competitive element is really what makes esports different from just gaming. It's also really important to understand that esports is always human versus human. So we're not talking about playing versus an opponent, we're not talking about playing versus a computer. We're always playing versus an opponent. And these are always in games where you are comparing basic skill levels. So you're not, you're not buying like the best gun or the best armor or something that gives you the advantage. It is basically everybody has the same kit. And you have to compete, battle your wits and stuff against each other to come out on top. And that's what makes it so empowering, because you get that sense of success, the pride, the recognition, and I'm actually the best. So let's just talk about the games a little bit. Yeah, so there's about 35 to 40 acknowledged esports games. As you can see there on the right hand side, I've put the various categories for you guys. But I mean, I don't expect you all to have to have heard of all of these games. I'm sure many of you are looking at that list going, I don't understand a word of that. But yeah, they are in different categories. So you've got, you know, your shooters, your racing games, your football games, your MOBA games, etc., etc. And these games aren't necessarily designed. You know, they aren't picked by the publishers. The people who make the games don't go, okay, we need a new esport in this category, so we're going to make one. It doesn't work like that. The community picks up um, what is a good game and what feels good, and that then, or that then becomes the esport. So I mean, you know, whilst I've got this list here, there are more. You know, but some have dropped off that list. They're not successful as much anymore. They're just not as popular. Um, so yeah, we like to consider esports as I've put here the modern mind game, and we call it chess 2.0 because it is similar in many ways to chess. You know, it's a game where you're just basically battling your strengths against an opponent who's trying to do the same thing, and it's that combative element of esports that makes it so enticing. Um, the other great thing about it is, of course, how inclusive it is. You know, anybody can play it. Obviously, there are certain restrictions with regards to age ratings on certain games, but you know, it is gender neutral. We have teams that are all girls. We have teams that are all boys. We have mixed gender teams. There's quite a big LGBTQ plus community as well, and of course, it's inclusive not just for gender but also age and also disabled and able-bodied peoples at the same time. There's quite a lot of really amazing things that people have made, you know, joysticks for specific purposes, you know, some being able to control with your eyes, your mouth, your feet. Yeah, it's really, really impressive actually, some of the things that they've done. And of course, this isn't, you know, whilst we do have the Paralympics and things, you know, there is accommodation for disability within sport. It's nowhere near the level that is capable of reaching in esports. Um, all of these games, yeah, you can play individual 1v1s, etc., with teams as well. But the most important thing is that they all have a fantastic spectator mode. Um, and these spectator modes and the spectator community is what really makes the esport. Now, esports themselves, they tend to have their own communities. So, for instance, like here, I've got League of Legends on the right hand side. Is that is a pure League of Legends community. The people who are watching and playing don't really tend to swap over into other games. It doesn't work like that. So if you think of it like a discipline, so if I equate it to athletics, for instance, you know, you might have the jumpers, you know, long jump and high jump and stuff, and they would fit into say one of these categories, and you might switch between the two, but you wouldn't necessarily then go and do a track event at 1600 meters. That's not your specialty. So you can kind of see the similarities between the two there. If we just talk about in the UK, esports is not recognised as a sport. It has been a question on everybody's mind for the last several years. It's discussed very often, you know, and we've come to the kind of crux point of going, do you know what? We don't really care at this point. Whether it is or it isn't, it doesn't matter to us. There is no definition, but it is important to note that in sort of 20, I think it's 21 countries across the world, they have defined it as a sport. We are not one of those, and we don't want to be one of those. The reason that they've done that is so that they can gather funding and kind of eat their way around, you know, getting funding through governments that way. But for us, it's more about the community, the scene, developing the esports in the UK, and basically we'll find our own funding to do so. Um, so yeah, who's watching? So we've got this is a Rocket League tournament. As you can see, it's absolutely packed. The live events at arenas are mind blowing. You know, if you've ever been to a live sporting event, you know the feel when you walk into the stadium. I can equate this because I've been in sport background as well, and I've obviously been to live games for both sports and esports, and they are, you know, you get the same feeling when you walk into that stadium. You are just greeted with wow, you know, it's really amazing stuff. I'll just quickly give you a little overview of some of these games. So you've got the sports games. These are generally age rated 3+. So you've got, you know, FIFA, PES, racing games. There are others as well I haven't included there, such as there's some tennis games that are going about, and table tennis games too. It's quite difficult to make a sports game that is really popular, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. But yeah, just go through some of these other titles here. So strategy titles, you've got some Splatoon there, Clash Royale that you might have heard of. Hearthstone was very big a while ago, that's now sort of dropped off. So the MOBA games, which are multiplayer online battle arenas. So you've got League of Legends, which you've probably heard of, Dota 2, which you may have heard of. The fighting categories as well. The older games, which are 16 plus, these are kind of more violent, but or sci-fi based. And then, of course, you've got the ones, the infamous ones that I'm sure you've all heard of, Call of Duty and Counter Strike, that everybody talks about being, bad for their kids, things like that. But it's important to note there are there have been studies to show that there is no significant correlation between, um, guns in video games and gun violence on the streets. Just you can find those out afterwards if you want. I'll send you some links. So who's watching? Some really interesting stats here from last year. These are taken from Twitch. 78% of viewers are male. Now, this is something that we as an organisation are really keen on trying to improve. We've got a current campaign going on that we started towards the end of last year called Women in Esports, but really it's more about diversity in esports and just creating the spread of our demographic to be more inclusive for everybody. It's a difficult question. Why is everybody male, and why aren't there any big professional all girls teams? And it is a tough question to answer. I don't really know why. I think it's because there aren't any traditional female esports heroes that have come up and sort of led the way. So I think we really need to do is kind of start more at the grassroots level. Start getting girls involved and from a younger age, and then of course that will in turn lead to some heroes being developed. So yeah, over half of esports enthusiasts are high-income earners, according to Newsy, and 65% have full-time jobs. But the biggest stat there that I want to point out is 600 billion minutes watched in 2019. I mean, that is a really significant number, and I'll just show you here. The audience growth has come up significantly over the last few years, and it's projected to be 646 million in 2023. So these are taken from Newzoo, which is a stats company we use, really good guys. And yeah, I mean, there's some really interesting facts there. I mean, you can see, obviously, the occasional viewers are bigger than the actual esports enthusiasts. This means people who aren't necessarily, playing the game, they are just watching because it's enjoyable to watch. It is a spectator sport. It is thrilling. It's exciting, and that's really saying something to me. That it is as good for spectators as it is for everybody else. So even if you're not playing, there's plenty of stuff for you to get involved in. Oops, skip one there. So these are the top 10 games watched from last month. It's a bit of a weird one, really, because this month for esports has been crazy with the release of a new game called Valorant. But if you look at these stats here, you've got the total hours at 66.5 million. So this is different from the esports hours, which is 20.3 million. Now, the esports hours is what we would consider like professional level gameplay analysis, hosted by a professional org, whereas total hours is kind of everybody who's combining their streams to show that game. This could be amateur level, this could be, you or me having a game against each other and putting it online. But what's really important to note there is that there are no sport titles in the top 10. It's a tough one. I don't know why sport is not as popular as the other games, but it's just not. So there are sport related titles there. For instance, Rocket League is essentially a football based game, but you are playing it in cars. So I always like to call it the FIFA meets what's it called, the Fast and the Furious. So you got rocket powered cars whacking around a big football trying to score another goal. So I mean, it is a sport title or it isn't. I don't know, but it's interesting to note that there are no sports titles in the top 10. The spread across the games is quite varied. Obviously, as you can see there, they all have a different share in the esports market, and it's this chart is moving all the time. You could look at this stat next month and it will be completely different, but it's more often than not going to be the same sort of 8 or 10 in there, shifting positions, and it is quite rare to see a title there unless there's a brand new release. So, for instance, when 2021 FIFA comes out, I imagine that might be up there for the first 2 months or so. So this is the CS:GO majors in September 2018 at Wembley with 30,000 people. And I think I really need to just kind of emphasize to you how big esports is, the kinds of venues that it takes over, and they fill out every time. These kind of events sell out within hours, and they're always, look at the amount of screens you've got there. It's just phenomenal. Everyone in the stand can see, no matter where they're sitting. You've got yeah, that's another point actually I really want to make. It's quite difficult to compare live esports events with live sporting events, and I think whilst they share a lot of similarities, one of the major differences between the two is the fact that esports have live what they call shoutcasters, which are essentially commentators. And these guys are interacting with the audience. They are engaging with the audience, and you can feel the hype just by listening to the shoutcasters who are getting excited. They are working the crowd up, and that is something that traditional sport doesn't necessarily have. It has it when you watch at home from your TV, but in the live stand, you can't hear the commentary. You're just watching the game. So this is something I think that traditional sport could really learn from. So just quick background for you on the industry. So there's a lot of different segments in the industry that kind of make up the whole. And it starts really at the top with the publishers. So these are the guys who make the games. As you can see here, there's probably some you've heard of: Microsoft, Nintendo, EA Sports, Activision Blizzard, of course. So it goes down like this. But the big game changer really for the esports was the broadcasters. So these are Twitch, which is a streaming service, Mixer, YouTube Live, all these kind of streaming services that make esports so prominent and widely available, is the ability for them to be globally broadcast. And again, I think this is also something that sport could learn from. Sport has been traditionally should be free. I believe it should be free for everybody, to watch, to play. But there are certain paywalls that you need to get through to watch, exclusive sporting matches, for instance, boxing or the BT Sport, for all the Premier games and whatever it is. These paywalls I don't believe should be in play. But I think the fact that esports is available for free for everybody, you can just tune in wherever you are, is really something that's quite strong. Just going down the list here, I'm not going to ignore hardware and software, but tournament organizers. So these guys are the ones who run the live scene. So any live event that you go to, ESL, MLG, Gfinity, these are the kinds of organizations that are organizing the live events. They are bringing in the fans. They are doing all the advertising, doing all the legwork behind the scenes to get these live events up and running. And then you've got teams, professionals, the talent, as I've mentioned, the shoutcasters. And then, very similar to traditional sport, you have the desk host, the stage host, and the analysis. So, you've got your Walker's, Gary Lineker, but for esports version. After the game, there they are talking on a desk, analysing the plays, going, "Oh, this was great," or etc. etc. The similarities are there. So this is just a rough idea of the revenues. I mean, these stats are slightly outdated. They're from 2018. The rest of the world stat particularly has picked up a lot. But as you can see, over the years, this has really developed into quite a big industry. And they are estimating it's worth about 1 billion now, and it will probably be about 1.1 to 1.2 billion by the end of this year. So again, this is slightly older stats. So these are 2018 stats. So it's saying it's 900 million, but like I said, it's over a billion now. But it's good to see those stats and where they come from. Most of the streams from most of the revenues from sponsorships, and then of course you've got all these other segments that make it into what it is. There are huge prize pools. This is something that is really important to note as well, particularly when you compare them to sporting prize pools. For instance, this one isn't even a big one. So this was a Street Fighter tournament in 2018. Um, I'm not sure what it was. I think it was about 30,000 or something like that. But you know, over the 2018 year, there's 150 million in offer for teams to win prizes. This obviously is huge, but you know, when you compare it to traditional sport, it's absolutely nothing. You know, the amount of money teams earn from winning the Premiership, for instance, is just mind-boggling. It doesn't even compare. That being said, you know, the esports prize pools have been going up significantly over the last few years. There was a Dota 2 tournament last year, and also the Fortnite World Cup, both of which had prize pools of over 30 million alone. You know, that's just those two tournaments. It's really important to note that, you know, esports is catching up in terms of level of revenue and financing to the sporting world. This is something interesting as well. I won't talk about it too long, but you know, this is a pop-up stand. This is a van called Big Betty that literally just drives around to events and sets up a little mini esports stage there and then, you know, and you can go and play. It's done by a company called ELC Gaming. But yeah, interesting that if you want to check that out afterwards, I can give you the link. So we should all play. Um, why should we all play? I think the most fundamental reason that actually is overlooked quite a lot is happiness and, you know, the positive psychology behind being happy, and that fundamental logic of, you know, it's releasing endorphins, you know, you're creating good memories, you're creating new friendships, and just kind of all of these um, positive effects that kind of get overlooked. So, I mean, just, you know, I've got the list here, but I just want to talk about a few others in particular. So, escapism is one that I really want to mention. You know, particularly in times like now when we're under this COVID lockdown. You know, being able to kind of, okay, I wake up every day, I listen to you know, the sad news of more terrible things that are going on in the world, but you know, I'd quite like to actually just block that out for a bit and, you know, go play some games. So, I mean, that's a wonderful thing as well to have. I do want to also point out down here at the bottom, I've starred in moderation and part of a balanced lifestyle, and that is really important to mention. Um, but I mean, yeah, all these other good things, all of them, I think, apart from maybe best screen time, you'll agree are within the sporting world as well. You know, it teaches you how to make friends, how to create new relationships, transferable skills like leadership, communication, problem solving, coordination, dexterity. You know, some of the pro players who are in, for instance, StarCraft. StarCraft is a strategy game. They are often making over 200 to 400 controlled moves per minute. They are with their hands digits, you know, their hand-eye coordination. So they're taking information, inputting it to their brain, processing it, making a decision, and then translating that decision into 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 moves a second. That's quite impressive, I think, you know, and that kind of reaction time, you know, it's a really, really good thing to develop. But then, you know, also, you know, going back to happiness, you know, these intrinsic rewards, sense of achievement, pride, recognition, you know, amongst your friends, and then, of course, the autonomy to do what you want. Now, this is somewhat different from traditional sport where there are kind of rules and things in play that kind of stop you branching out. Whereas in esports, you can kind of do whatever you want within the game. So if you want to play a particular role, you can. If you want to stop playing that role anymore, you can. So you know, if you've spent the last 12 years of your life being a defender and you wanted to suddenly start being, you know, an attacker, you can't necessarily just go and do that in sport. Excuse me. So yeah, I think that's quite really important to mention as well. You know, you can take part in all sides of the activity, not just the one that you've been training for however long. Going physical, going mainstream. This is an interesting point. Last year was a news article. Geeks become the new jocks as British universities now have more gaming teams than football. This actually shocked me when it came out. I wasn't really expecting that to happen. You know, I would have thought at least somewhat below football teams. You know, football being the most popular sport for boys in the UK. Really surprised to know that university teams had overtaken that mark, and it was quite shocking for us. But it's a positive shock. It's a good thing, because as I've mentioned, they've all got great benefits that are very similar. So it doesn't matter. We're not trying to rival sport. We're not trying to take over sport. Even though articles like this are coming out, doesn't necessarily mean that the esports industry is thinking, okay, we want to be better than sport. Nobody in the esports space is saying that. We're very happy with being our own industry. Um, but what's really key is that the events are so engaging, more so than real sport with the shoutcasters and things, and that's really powerful. And I think again that's where traditional sport needs to learn from. Um, but what I do want to talk about, I've got there at the bottom, is the Royal Ravens. So the Royal Ravens are a London-based UK Call of Duty team, and I want to compare these guys to traditional sporting events because traditional sport and competition in general, can be a great way to combat kind of global catastrophes, war, corruption, racism, greed, and there's been some really amazing headway, especially over the last decade, in traditional sport um, to combat these kinds of things, particularly racism. Um, but however, sport itself is very political. The organisations at the very top kind of hold a lot of power and control. And whilst it's great to see the boots on the ground, which is you and I and everybody else who are working towards these goals, we are at some point limited by um, the top end control. Esports is by and large kind of free from a lot of that. There is toxicity online, obviously, but in the professional scene, it is absolutely not tolerated, and the people who are playing in it are so averse to being banned or anything like that. It's just it doesn't happen. You don't see it, and with the occasional one or two exceptions that I've heard of over the last few years. But freedom of speech is really valuable, and I know, and I'm not saying anything bad about sport at all. I know they have done some fantastic things, in terms of fundraising, um, you know, helping vulnerable people, and being involved in charities, things like that. Definitely great stuff. But I would just want to mention Royal Ravens, who won a tournament 2 weeks ago, and then of course donated all of their prize pool winnings to the NHS, which was about £15,000, I believe, or $15,000. There are some other notable mentions. So there's a game called Overwatch, which is made by Blizzard, and 2 years ago they made a skin, which is it's basically an outfit for her to wear. In the game, she is a medic, and they released a pink skin for her, and it was on sale for a limited amount of time for about 15 quid, and they donated all of the sales of that to breast cancer research. And I think, if I remember rightly, it made over $12 million for breast cancer. I mean, the communities are very similar as well. You've got people fundraising on sport, and you've got people fundraising in esports, but um, there's no real drive to do it in esports. It just kind of happens naturally, and I really think that that's something also sport can learn from. So sport and esports. I know this is kind of a reason that a lot of you are here, and you're kind of wanting to know how can we get involved. What's going to be good for our club or community. But before we get into that, I just want to show some of the great examples of where sport and esports has met in the past. So obviously you can see there Gareth Bales unveils his new esports org. This is a club called Elevens, and I'm not sure how they're doing, but it is a FIFA organisation. It was only announced a few months ago, so I'm not sure if they've actually played any tournaments or not yet. But yeah, as I mentioned earlier, 21 countries around the world classify it as a sport, and we don't want to do that here. The reason being is that we like it as our own industry, and there's potential for the two to collaborate if we keep it separate. So there's some really important life skills that can be transferable between the two. For instance, if you're a young child playing FIFA and you realize, oh, I can do this trick to get past an opponent or something in real life, and then you go to your football coach and say, look, I did this trick last night with my mates. I was playing FIFA and I did this thing. How do I do it? And then thus learning. The other great thing about it is, of course, you've got the the bird's eye view. You can view replays. You can kind of do self-analysis of things that you don't necessarily see when you're on the pitch or when you're playing the game. And I'm sorry for keep using football as an example here, but it's just um, the easiest for me to kind of demonstrate this. But I mean, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, all of these important life skills are transferable. So you've got, teamwork, team spirit as well, hand-to-eye coordination, reflexes, decision making, processing kind of information. Um, so yeah, sports clubs in general are all embracing esports in a big way. There's been a few big names that you may have heard of who are creating their own teams. Manchester City being one of them, and then of course players as well. Gareth Bales is probably the most prominent UK-based player, but that you've seen there's quite a few Spanish footballers who have started doing their own stuff, and American as well. Um, but yeah, it's being embraced in a big way, and I want to also just mention the IOC. So obviously the Olympics Committee has said long ago that esports isn't a sport, and it probably won't ever be because it doesn't meet their Olympic values, and that's okay. But the esports world was not quite prepared to agree with that. There was my CEO Chester King. He's been in talks with the IOC for a long time. He's been discussing with them probably over the last 2 or 3 years. Where does esports fit into the IOC's charter? And essentially, the esports world went, okay, well, we're fine with not being part of it, but we want something as big. So in the 2018 Olympics, the Winter Olympics, right before they did the opening ceremony, I think it was like 3 or 4 days before, Intel, which I'm sure you've heard of, the company, organized an event called the IEM, which is Intel Extreme Masters, and it went on for 2 weeks prior to the opening of the Olympics, and a huge success. And they planned another one this year for the Tokyo Olympics. However, that's been cancelled. Well, it's not cancelled. It's been delayed for a year, which is a massive shame. I'm sure you all understand that. But the esports event will still go ahead. It was called the Intel World Open, I think. And that was supposed to be, as I said, yeah, held 2 weeks before the opening ceremony. So it's a real shame that obviously the Olympics has been cancelled, or delayed rather. But the esports world, even though our event won't be live, won't be in person, we'll still hold it online. It will still go ahead, and it will still be bringing those communities together. It will still be continuing the competition. Will still be producing good content for people to watch, people to see. I've seen so many videos going around on Instagram and socials and Facebook, of bored footballers in their houses making up their dream teams with, various household items that they found kitted around the place. And, it's funny, but it's like they're bored, and their life has essentially had to be put on hold because of this whole lockdown. Whereas in esports, it doesn't stop. We're already digital. We're already, whilst we might not see the picture at the top left there, whilst we might not be, in a stadium full of thousands of fans and professional players, we can still actually create the event, and in some ways have more fans because obviously you're tuning in on a live audience from home. So I think, you know, this situation, particularly with the delaying of the Olympics, will probably force IOC to, kind of reevaluate their perspective of esports. I'm not sure which way it will go, but it's just interesting to think about. So the similarities between the two industries are, very subtle but obvious at the same time. Like when you have somebody like me explain it to you, you think, oh yeah, it is obvious. How did I not see that before? But until you have somebody explain it to you, you just don't really make those connections. And I think that's something that we as the British Esports Association are trying to do more. Give this education to everybody. Well, I say education; it's just pointing out the obvious, really. But like I said, it's subtle, so you don't notice it. Um, so I've got a quote here from Gregan. He's an ex-professional coach for a really good Rocket League team, and he is really interested in sport and fitness as a general lifestyle choice. And I think what he says here, is really poignant. So he says, I've met so many of my closest friends through sport, and because gaming is online, it's hard to get the same benefits. Nothing will ever replace human connections, and sport is the best way to get that. Now, I really agree with that. That's a great statement. Sport is fun. Sport is, being outside and playing. Getting getting your heart rate up and your blood flowing. There's no feeling quite like that. Um, and of course, the social elements of it as well are fantastic. Um, but I do have to point out that you will meet as many friends online. You will meet, you'll meet as many close friends. You'll meet colleagues. You'll meet, people that you would never expected to meet around the world. I've got friends from gaming who are in Sweden, Finland, America, Argentina. And I've even met some of them. So I have to say, great statement from him, and I do agree with it. But there are, again, similarities to be drawn between sport and esports. Now, moving on, I just want to talk to you a little bit about the British Esports Association and who we are and what we do. So, we're a not-for-profit organisation established in 2016. Our three goals are to promote, improve, and inspire. But there's a lot more to it than just those three goals. We've discovered, particularly over the last year or two, that it's not just about doing those three things. We've got to fund and support grassroots esports, establish best practice within the UK scene, increase awareness of esports, and that's the kind of reason we do webinars like this. Deliver courses and qualifications, whether this is in an educational setting or whether you want to be a player and you want to improve your play style, or whether you want to be a coach or a manager, and then also as well provide expert advice, and generally other priorities as well that we have, although they're not our main three goals, but these have been developing over time, particularly online safety, governmental structure and guidance, women in esports, gender imbalance, and then probably the most prominent one is like harassment, cyberbullying, and toxicity whilst being online. So those are the kinds of things that we are aiming to do as an organisation. Let me just talk a little bit about some of the pilots that we've done. And I know that some of you are interested in these as well because some of them relate to sporting clubs. So this is the Maida Vale Library in June 17, and this was an after-school sports club for anybody to get involved. They joined. It was really popular. We had a lot of good findings. As you can see there, two kids giving a high five in the background there. And this was one of the most exciting things that they'd done in school ever. To be honest, the enthusiasm from the kids was quite mind blowing. Now, this one's probably the most interesting to you all. This is the eSports Active City pilot. So this was West Ham United Foundation organisation trying to get an activity that included sport and esports together. It was funded by London Sport. It lasted for a week throughout the October half term. And it was every day aimed to sort of 14 to 19-year-olds. We had a partnership with Game, who provided all the equipment, and also a partnership with Archery GB. And all of these disciplines had, professional coaches there as well. So obviously West Ham providing the football coaches, Game and us were providing the esports coaches, and Archery GB providing archery coaches. It was fantastic. There's a whole case study on our website. You can check it out afterwards. But yeah, obviously Rocket League took place indoors in the classrooms, and the football and archery took place outdoors. And like I said, this initiative was kind of developed with the aim to provide an opportunity to show how esports and sports can be brought together, not just sport, but physical activity in general. Show the kids some things that they'd never done before. It was free to attend. They've never played Rocket League. Some of them never shot a bow before. Probably most of them had kicked a football around, but these kind of pilots, again, super successful. We were really, we only had a certain amount of spaces, obviously due to the amount of kit that we had. But yeah, spaces ran out very, very quickly. These kind of studies are aimed to kind of remove the smokescreen of esports being bad, and the negative connotations behind it. Because when it is used as part of a moderated and balanced lifestyle, it can be really effective to helping young people get engaged with physical activity. So that leads me into the school's esports pilot, which is our initial champs rerun, basically. So this was our pilot for what is now known as the British Esports Championships. So the championships is it's a tournament that runs throughout the year that schools and colleges across the UK can get involved in. We run 3 main games, as you can see there at the bottom: League of Legends, Overwatch, and Rocket League. Rocket League is a 3+ game, and that's the one I mentioned before with the rocket-powered cars kicking the football around. We've got Overwatch, which is a 12+, and it is a shooter game, but it's very cartoony and stylized. And League of Legends is a MOBA game. They're all super popular. They're all on that chart that I showed earlier about most watched games, and we have some fantastic engagement from our students for that. So if you're partaking in the champs, we get to play against other schools and colleges around the UK. It's weekly games. It's done on a sort of term basis. So we'll run a September to Christmas term, and then a sort of January to mid-March, April kind of time. Winners get some amazing stuff. So not only do you get to be involved with us as the organisation, you'll get some good, really good guidance. We have game advisors who are there to help, and people in the professional scene as well. But winners can get jerseys printed. They get trophies, certificates, pro level coaching. The winners of last year's got to go to a Excel and do a day in the life of a pro esports guy with professional all of the things that go alongside that. So I don't know if you know this actually, but professional esports players generally all live in a house together, or if they don't, they kind of commute to one to work in the day. But they have physiotherapists, they have dietitians, they have personal trainers, they have all of the things that you would expect a pro level athlete to have. So that's kind of key to show that, yeah, all right, you might be at home playing games, but if you do hit this top level, the support that you get there is quite prominent. So the other major thing that we want to shout about is going to the arena. So this was the setup that we had last year before the finals. So the grand finals we hold live at Insomnia, which is the UK's largest gaming festival, and it's held at the Birmingham NEC. Obviously, all the seats are empty there because this was about 3 hours before the doors opened. But our kids went up on there and played on stage, with a live audience, with a shoutcaster, with all the production team and the media behind it, and basically got the feel for being a professional level esport athlete. There's many different career pathways that esports can take you down. Professional player, which is probably the one that everybody wants, but is also the hardest to get into. So you've got these other things there as well. So you've got coaching, PR, sales, business management, production, journalism, product management, admin. I'm not going to read out, but basically all of these skills are in other industries. They are super versatile and very transferable. And I think that gets overlooked quite a lot. But I think pretty much everything that you have in any other industry, it's also needed in the esports industry. It's quite unique in that way. It's an amalgamation of everything else and brought together to promote esports. There's some more education pathways as well. It's been really noticed quite lately over the last year or two. Schools and colleges are starting to introduce bolt-on modules as part of their qualifications, and most importantly, staffs introduced the first full esports degree in 2018. Chichester and Salford have followed suit this year, or last year rather, and a few more will probably continue to do so in 2020, 2021. There are a few more things that I've put there that are actually really important as well to read. I'll just quickly read through them. So more universities are exploring the idea. AIM is also looking at adding esports to its existing higher education courses, and then of course us and UKI, which is the trade body for UK esports, also sit on the Southeast College's Digital Skills Advisory Board. So yeah, where is the future going for esports? So this is what we're doing. I've given you a bit of a background about our organisation, what we've achieved, where we're going now. So we're just going to continue working towards our vision for 2022, improve the landscape across the UK, get more people involved, particularly with education, but also with sport. And that's really something that we're quite keen on doing. The other things as well is to just inspire more diversity. And I also want to mention AOC Sport down here on the right hand side. There's some other partnerships we have with Twitch Student, Twitch Partnership, and AOC Sport. Now, AOC, which is the Association of Colleges, an amazing organization, and they have been really, really supportive of us from day one. I think that logo is a bit out of date now because I don't think they are AOC Sport anymore. They are just AOC, and AOC Sport is a sort of subsection of that. But we last year, excuse me, last year we did a forum with them for esports in further education. It was amazingly successful. We held it in May time. We had about 40, 50 delegates come in from from colleges all across the country, and yeah, it really created quite a buzz for us particularly, and also for AOC, and just showing how we held it in Worcester Warriors Six Ways Stadium. In one of the executive boxes. It was quite fantastic actually for us to have this held in a sporting setting. AOC did a really great job there. But like I said, they've been super supportive. We are going to be doing another forum like that this year. We were going to do it in May, but obviously because of the whole lockdown situation, we will be postponing until probably the autumn. But yeah, we'll be doing that. It will be called Education, Esports in Education. And yeah, fingers crossed, by that point in our organisation, we should have the capability to incorporate clubs as well as schools and colleges. I just want to talk one more thing very quickly about the future of our org in terms of we don't just want to be doing schools and colleges. We want to be able to include everybody. So we are at the moment in developing a platform where that can be achieved, and hopefully by the summer this should be in play and anybody can join, whether that's part of a youth group, a community group, or sporting club like your local football team or whatever it is. So ideally these are the kinds of things that we want to achieve in the next few years, and obviously continue to produce good talent from the UK. So I hope I haven't waffled on too much there or bored anybody, but thank you very much for listening. And of course, if you have any questions, we've probably got about 10 minutes or so. We can do a short Q&A.
Nice one, thanks, Elliot. Has anyone got any questions? I know I have a couple, so if anyone wants to fire away, I think